Many of us have been around for Detroit for a while. We know that there are many efforts over many years to tell good things about, to say good things about Detroit and to tell Detroit's story. So our next panel is to talk about some of those efforts and some of the ongoing efforts. And we're delighted to have several people who've been involved in that process for many years. First of all, our moderator for this panel is Mark Sorge, Executive Director of the Detroit Regional News Hub, and she has been instrumental in efforts to try to tell the story about Detroit. We also have Ken Cockrell Jr. with us. Ken is a former member of the Detroit City Council, former mayor, Wayne State alum, journalism program, and a good friend of Wayne State. We're delighted Ken is here. Mary Kramer, who is the publisher of Crane's Detroit Business, longtime Detroiter, longtime advocate for the city of Detroit. Paula Silver, who has been with Quicken Loans and has been very involved in a lot of the promotion for downtown. And finally, David Lorenz, who is with Travel Detroit. So we have 4 great panelists who are going to talk a little bit about some of the efforts, some of the things that are going on in the city and some of the ways forward. So thank you. March?
Thank you, Matt. Hi, guys.
Good morning.
How are you? Good. Thank you very much for doing this. I'm going to take a quick minute to tell you a little bit about the Detroit Regional News Hub. About 5 years ago, Mary Kramer talked me into this. Mark Campbell, who's sitting right there, and I were tapped to try to put together a program to try to tell journalists who are parachuting into our city and not have time just spending a day and writing stories that you've all read. So when we started this all out, Laura and I decided the best thing to do would be to talk to our media friends to see what they would like. So we asked Mary to chair our media advisory committee, and what we found out from them, what we were trying to accomplish, was if you make it a PR thing, please don't bother. So I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. So we went back to the drawing board. What we created was basically a concierge for journalists when they come into town or when they're here. So when someone is coming into town to find us, or one of you will send them to us, and we will try very hard to hook them up with the data, the people, the information they need to do a balanced story about Detroit. Lots of times we'll give them a tour. Sometimes we go with them, sometimes we hire someone to do it, but we try to let them find their stories. As a former journalist, I know that I don't want somebody to tell me how to do my story. And I can tell you, Alexis would tell you the exact same thing as a former journalist. You want to find your own story. So here's kind of how we did it. We became a clearinghouse, basically, for all these things. And we created a website as we started out, and we get somewhere between 2.5 and 3 million people looking at that site over the 5 years that we've been doing this. We created it as a site that reporters would want. Warren and I went through with a couple of other people. Dave Lindholm was one of them as well. And we went through and looked for the stuff we thought reporters might like to know about our city, whether it was automotive or culture or whatever that might be. Created a website. We thought, well, that's kind of cool. So that's kind of a website. Big deal. Everybody has a website. So we decided to take it a little bit further and created a thing called the Detroit Information Network, because we want to share the stories. So what we did, we created the Detroit Information Network, where every day we go in there and put the stories in that are happening about our city. And it's on our website. You can go in there, you can find anything that's happening in our region about what happened in the city or the region that day. Then we thought, okay, we probably need to do a blog. Now, one of our ideas was obviously to share the stories already written. We also need to find some things that are under the radar. As Mary would say, the underreported stories is one of her favorite things. So we created a blog site and prepared to be bloggers. We don't pay very much, but we have some people that are really dedicated to the city and want to talk about the blogs. So that blog site, we've been very lucky, gets 40,000 to 50,000 hits a month, so that's pretty good for little us. And basically try to find the stories that people don't know. And then we decided, well, we also should share the stories better about other people are writing. So we created a thing called the Bulldog Edition, which goes out every Thursday at 5 o'clock. And it has a compilation of the stories that we think people should know about the city, the region that happened that week, along with a few news tips that people might like to know if you're a reporter, and kind of go forward from there. Then we thought, let's bring some reporters into town. So we held 3 Transformation Detroit media briefings. The first one, we had about 30 people more, 40 people in the first one. And they were from all over the place. A couple people came in from Canada, there were some people here, they came from outside the country. We took them around all of Metro Detroit. Got feedback, and they said, you know, the stories, we could do this again next year, the stories in the city. So the next year we took them into the city. We had about 80 reporters come in and talk about that. The third year, we decided to do the neighborhoods because that's where the story was. And we had about 40 or 50 reporters do that. And the great thing was, at that point now, they're tweeting all the time. Emily tweeted all the way through this whole thing. Lots of tweets. In fact, we were so engaged, I think we had, what did I put down here? 400,000 people on that particular day talking about what we're doing in Detroit. So that's very cool, from the Twitter and from the other things that we were doing. We've also worked with the State Department and the Visitors Bureau to bring people in from reporters into the city to talk about those kinds of things. So when they come in, we've been talking about it. What I think is so terrific and how it's changing is that reporters so often used to parachute in, do 1 or 2 days. Now, so many, especially from Europe and South America, are coming in and spending anywhere from 1 to 2 weeks to do their story. So I think that's a real plus. We still have some parachute guys, but we're making some good progress there. And then what we did is we also decided we can't do this without people in the PR business. So we created a PR advisory committee. And that now is about 90 people. Some of you are part of that. And I hope the rest of you will be. We're going to kind of work all together on this thing now. And what we actually did is bring everybody together for the Transportation Track media briefings. We talked about how we were going to work together to get this all done, how to get the stories out, what people wants to see. And then sometimes when we have an opportunity, when we get reporters or PR friends get reporters, we'll send them back and forth so they're getting a much more broad story of what's happening in the region. And then we decided, well, you know, we should have some reporters. So in your packets there, you'll have these fact sheets. We update these every quarter and add to them all the time. It started out to be, I think, just a 3-page fact sheet, and now it's we divided up because there's so much new going on in the city. I thought that was very cool. So those are the kinds of things we've done with the hub. One of the things we're so very proud of is we started an organization called Youth Neighborhood News. It's now called Youth Neighborhood News, the Logan Network. And it's a broadcast journalism program for high school kids. And it's now at Wayne State, thanks to Matt, and they're working together. But they have, Vanessa Denhout teaches that for us. And it has about anywhere from 12 to 15 kids. They come in every year. And what we're so pleased about is every one of the kids that's left that program has gone on to college. So we're very pleased about that. And that's kind of what we're doing at the hub. So that's that part of it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sit down because I'm coughing. So I won't be able to write. And I'm going to ask you guys just to go right down the row and maybe talk for 5 to 8 minutes about what you're all up to. And then I'll come back up and run open this up for discussion to you guys. David, where do you want to start?
Sure, thank you, Mark. Good morning, Dave Lorenz from Travel Michigan, actually. We're a division of the Michigan Economic Development Corporation. Always required to say that for some reason. Well, I'll tell you what we're doing. We work, of course, with Weber Shandwick on public relations efforts for both the travel part of MEDC and also the business marketing area as well. I hope you've seen and heard some of our Pure Michigan ads that have been out there. We certainly have been trying to get across a message to not only the state of Michigan, the people who live here, but the people who live throughout the country and now on an international basis as well. We knew back well before Pure Michigan was actually born that our biggest challenge as a state, actually 2 challenges. One was that we were kind of out of the communications business for a long time. We forgot and we kind of gave up on marketing to the world who we really were. That we're this really interesting, diverse, beautiful, gritty, just plain different place. A place that's worth visiting, a place that should be considered to live in, a place that you can work in a really great state. For many years, the state had gotten out of marketing itself. And so back, I think I arrived about 12 years ago, we really started to kind of grasp on this thought that we need to get out there again and tell the world who we really are. That we are the state that offers great wilderness activities, woods and waters, 11,000 inland lakes, never more than 5 miles away from a major lake and stream, 2 beautiful peninsulas, and a state that also offers really interesting city experiences like those that can be experienced here in Detroit. But as we look at the state as a brand, we realized that we couldn't just plain say that we're a beautiful place. Everybody has a beautiful place, and that we have interesting cities. Everybody has interesting cities. What we have to offer here, we believed and we still do, were unique experiences, things that you can only do here, authentic destinations, places like Detroit, specific places like Motown, Hitsville, USA, Greektown, any other places like that. And of course, the great natural wonders that we have to offer. So we've been trying to do that in a variety of ways: TV, radio, all the other marketing techniques that you would expect us to use, including social media and everything else. And so far, so good. The campaign has been recognized as one of the best in the country. Michigan.org has been the #1 state travel website for 7 years in a row. All these things are good to drive travel and awareness to this state. But when it comes to Detroit, we both have challenges and great opportunities. Because if you were to ask people what Michigan is all about, let's say 10 years ago, and if you were to ask them what Michigan was about, they very likely, if farther away that they were, maybe in Texas and Florida and such, they very likely would have said, well, Michigan is kind of old Detroit, what I call the old bad Detroit, and constantly cold, which, so of course the challenge is for us to tell the real story, not only about the entire state, but specifically about Detroit. The Detroit story here is so impactful for the entire state that our challenge has been working with the Detroit Metro Convention Visitors Bureau to tell what we believe is the real story. A big city going through big challenges, and we have to be honest about that, and we try to be that way. And that offers these tremendous experiences that you can only have here. So that's what we do in a variety of ways. We only hope to be part of the conversation, to take part in that conversation. I'm sure you've all seen the negative stories that occasionally run, or even some positive stories that might run about Detroit. And then if you look at the online comments of those stories that come after the story, the incredible negativity that almost always follows. Our challenge, I believe, is to be proactive and reactive at the same time, to react to those negative comments that are out there, but to try to reach out in advance and explain that you bet this is a gritty city, this is an interesting place, and it's one that is well worth a visitation. It's not Chicago, it's not San Francisco, it's not LA, it's not Orlando, and thank God for that, because it's Detroit, and this is a great place. It really is. Thank
you. The interest not only in Detroit and suburban Detroit, Michigan, not only across the nation but across the world in Dan's and downtown Detroit's development has just been it's just skyrocketed and has been dizzying actually to the team over at Quicken Loans. So let me tell you a little bit about what's been going on there. I think you sort of have to have lived under a rock if you haven't heard about all the great things happening in downtown Detroit, and obviously what we've been calling Opportunity Detroit. Well, I'm going to give you a little bit of background and history on how Opportunity Detroit, which is what we had initially coined the great things happening in Detroit, and we're hoping now that we, as in Dan Gilbert, now is growing to outside of the Quicken Loans family and into Detroit and southeastern Michigan and across the state and further. But when we moved in 4 years ago, there was Campus Marshall was pretty quiet. We would look out the window of the Copyright Building and see people walking around downtown, in the area. A year later, we brought in about 1,002 more people. Traffic grew exponentially in the past 4 or 5 years. The traffic has continued to grow, and now, not so much on a day like today, but on a sunny summer day in downtown Detroit, it's hard to find a place at a restaurant for lunch. It's the growth has been pretty crazy. When the Tigers played the World Series in downtown Detroit here a few years ago, the team at Quicken Loans took a look at it and said, okay, let's look to see, here we have our, favorite sports team in the city, on a global basis, playing in the World Series. Let's make a play for attention for, all the great things that Detroit has to offer. So we coined it Opportunity Detroit, and where that opportunity we initially saw was in the entrepreneurialism and business spirit, the ability to reinvigorate, especially the downtown area, with a lot of business interest. Since Quicken Loans moved to downtown Detroit, hundreds of companies have seen light and come downtown. It's not to say that that's Quicken Loans didn't start that trend, but definitely played a role in helping to recruit more businesses to downtown Detroit. And as the momentum grew and more businesses joined us, it was let's talk about the opportunities that exist here, not only for business, not only for entrepreneurs who want to start up a small company and where you can find real estate to rent for your business pretty cheap. Let's bring in tech companies. Let's start to develop Detroit as a tech community. Let's show all the opportunities that exist in Detroit for business, for entrepreneurs, and then, hey, you know what? Let's take a look at all these hipsters who want to live in an urban core and want to, experience, walk to work and walk to bars and entertainment venues. Let's look at hipsters and see what we can do to attract them, and thus the placemaking and the increased places to sit in downtown Detroit, the Wi-Fi in Campus Marshall's Park. So in the past 4 or 5 years, the opportunities to live, work, play in the city have just exponentially grown. It's increasingly interesting to not only those people who live in the area to come downtown, but also in the state, across the country. You recently read in Cranes and other of the media outlets about the Dime Music School coming to downtown Detroit, and I'm telling you what, I just read what the article quoted, the founders of the Dime School, is that they see Detroit as being the next great place to be. And I think that that's something that's resonating more and more in the area and across the globe. Like I said, one of the reasons I left Quicken Loans is because of the constant media deadlines and the constant interest. It sort of can burn you out after a while. But the interest is there, the interest is growing. So as Peter mentioned, it's basically up to us to be the storytellers, to make sure that we're contacting the press, making sure that the Mary Kramers of the world are telling the story for us, and getting the message out there. Mary?
Okay. I'm going to stand up if that's okay. And before I start, I'm just curious, how many people in this room are from an agency? Okay. How many are from a corporation or a company? Okay. How many might be from a nonprofit? Okay. And there probably are some students as well. Okay, great. I wanted to start by feeding off the presentation earlier because Grand Rapids was invoked several times. That's where I grew up. And the Grand Rapids I remember was a dead town that I could not wait to get out of because there was nowhere to eat downtown, and it was pretty much, the phrase when I was growing up was, if you ain't Dutch, you ain't much, and that was sort of the way you kind of looked at the world, and there was, it was a strong Christian Reform base, strong Catholic school base, and then there were other people, I'm not sure who they were, but they lived there as well. But it was really dead. If you look at what downtown Detroit was along Woodward Avenue, all those vacant stores, that's what downtown Grand Rapids was like. It was awful. And then things changed because the private sector started investing in downtown, and they started championing the city, and they used art and a bunch of other things as kind of leverage to make a place out of downtown. And the thing that I noticed when I moved here in 1989 to work at Crane, the big difference that I saw between Grand Rapids and Detroit, one of the big differences, I couldn't find anybody who was proud of the city of Detroit. And if you think about it today, other than a few, count on one hand the business leaders that you think of when it comes to being a champion for Detroit. It was more like here, it was more like a guilt thing. It was not really, oh God, we gotta do this. That was kind of Detroit Renaissance. Well, we gotta do something because if we don't, then it'll really be bad, even worse. And that was one of the big differences that I saw between Grand Rapids and Detroit. So I came to Detroit, I got this terrific job at Crane's Detroit Business. Keith Crane, when I told him that I really wanted to be a small town newspaper editor to help set a community agenda because I was very community focused, he said that's what Crane's Detroit Business is, only it's going to be the business community that you will be the thought leadership convener for. And I thought, okay, I'll try that. And 25 years later, I'm still here. So I really believe there's a role for Crane's Detroit Business. We cover 5 areas and 5 counties in our coverage area. Detroit is part of that, but we cover the entire region. But I really believe that Detroit is the lead that has to be successful in order for the whole region to be successful. And so we take our storytelling ability at Crane's very seriously. A couple things that I want to highlight in terms of how we leverage the assets that we have in our publication, not to do PR. That's not what we do, but we do tell stories. And the stories, I think, give an accurate reflection of, Marge used the phrase, underreported aspects of our region. And I really feel strongly that's one of the things that we should be doing. Examples, 20 in their 20s. This was a thing when everybody's talking about brain drain. We decided to start doing something where we would identify people, 20 people in their 20s doing interesting things, didn't have to make $1 bazillion, but we're doing interesting things in the market. That's been extremely successful. I think we have now an alumni group of about 180 people, 20 people a year. House party. I live in the city of Detroit. I've always lived in the city of Detroit, and you know how someone was saying earlier that you know, if they were going out for college and their parents said, don't say you're from Detroit. The thing that I found is when I told people I lived in the city, they looked at me like I was from Mars. And I thought, that's odd, because I actually love my neighborhood, and I met more people in my neighborhood faster than any of the 6 communities I lived in before. And this is the largest city I've ever lived in, so what's up with that? So we started this thing with MSHDA, the State Housing Development Authority. It's called the House Party. And every year we have hosts who are Crane readers open their house up to people who sign up through our website to go have a cocktail party. 30, 40 simultaneous cocktail parties in individual homes, and then people go to an afterglow. And what suburban people found out was, guess what? There's professionals living in Detroit. Who knew? And that there are kind of some cool houses in Detroit. And there are some kind of cool neighborhoods in Detroit. So we are very proud of that series of events that we've done. This year we are taking a 1-year hiatus because we're doing something else in September. We are doing something called the Homecoming. And the idea of that, and I have handouts for you today, if you care to take one. The idea is that Detroit, post-bankruptcy, needs more investment. We need more people to connect with this city. So we are, with our public partners, the mayor's office, the governor's office, the MEDC, the Detroit Economic Growth Corp, and Wayne State University, and many others, we are doing an invitation-only event for expatriates. People who grew up here, went to school here, might have worked here, but now are running things somewhere else or owning things somewhere else. So we're going to bring them back for a 3-day conference with some big speakers, but some immersions in the city to actually see what's actually going on the ground here. We're going to create a prospectus. This 313-year-old organization entity is seeking new investors. And here are some opportunities that are philanthropic, that are big commercial plays, or smaller plays like entrepreneurial grants. We are very excited about this homecoming because I think it can help move the needle on some things that our public partners have been trying to do, and we play the role of a convener. We're like Switzerland. Lots of people play in our sandbox because we like to bring people together to work on a common goal who might not always work well together. You understand that, don't you, Ken? Okay. So, and we also started one other thing that all of you who are in this room can use. It's called Detroit 2.0. It's a weekly e-newsletter that comes out on Wednesdays. It's Detroit-centric. You can subscribe to it for free, or if you have company offices in other markets or customers in other markets, you can just forward it to them or tell us who you want us to send it to and we'll send it to them. But the idea behind it is it's one place that recaps every week everything that's going on. And the reason that we're doing that is we noticed in 2013 we had 2.5 million unique visitors to our website. About almost 15% of those came from 3 cities: New York, Washington, Chicago, and Los Angeles. 15% of our traffic. Anything Dan Gilbert was doing was off the charts. But anything really related to real estate or redevelopment in the city of Detroit, that's what people wanted to know. So we thought we could do something locally for our own readers, but we could also do something that could be used for those folks outside the market who are interested in Detroit, because Detroit is a very hot topic right now, and we should be able to take advantage of it. I want to refer to, in closing, I just want to refer to the earlier presentation about the Levi using the brand. You know, they extended their brand by using that small town in Pennsylvania. That's what Chrysler has done with their advertising, which even before the M&M ad, they used an Edgar Guest poem for an ad that was an earlier predecessor to the M&M ad at the Fox Theater, which was an amazing, he's a Detroit poet, right? So whoever is doing their advertising is trying to get authentic voices to connect the Chrysler brand with the Detroit brand. Chrysler has done that, Cricket has done that. Other companies, your companies could do that. You could think about what your company stands for, and does your brand align with the Detroit brand, and maybe leverage that a little bit, because I think we will all benefit, everybody who does business in the market, if we start thinking about how to leverage our profiles. Be proud to say you're from Detroit, Metro Detroit, whether it's in the city or out of the city. In Grand Rapids, it doesn't really matter. It shouldn't matter here. Thank you.
So once again, my name is Ken Cockrell Jr., and I am the Executive Director of Detroit Future City. But as was referenced in the introductory comments, before I became the Executive Director of Detroit Future City, I actually spent about 16 years in Detroit city government, specifically most of that time in the office of Detroit City Council. That includes one 4-year term as President of City Council, and also a brief period of time as interim mayor of the city of Detroit after a certain former mayor, who I shall address only as he who shall not be named, went to prison. So I recently wrapped up at the end of December of last year my last term on the Detroit City Council. I chose not to seek re-election last year, mainly just because I got to a point where I spent 16 years on City Council. I'd done a lot of what I thought was good work, passed a lot of really good legislation, but I also got to the point where I realized that I'd probably done all I could do and that it was time to move on. I sort of looked at it more or less. Interestingly enough, some of you may relate to this. One of my good friends and mentors actually is the head of a public relations firm, and one of the things that he said is, it's not a bad take to kind of change the game up every once in a while and switch and do something different. Otherwise, you wind up getting typecast. So being a big sci-fi fan, you can relate to this. William Shatner had a hard time getting work after Star Trek for a long time because people were like, I don't want to cast Captain Kirk in my movie. So it took him a little while to build up, or rather rebuild his brand to the point where people could see him and envision him doing something different. And I decided I didn't want to be typecast, so I chose not to seek re-election. I decided to do something different. So in January of this year, I actually became the Executive Director of Detroit Future City. And to tell you a little bit about that, specifically what I do in that role is I run Detroit Future City's implementation office. Now, what is Detroit Future City? Well, probably the best way to explain that is to talk about something else, which is called the Detroit Strategic Framework. And for those of you that are not familiar with the Detroit Strategic Framework, the Detroit Strategic Framework is a 347-page document that was actually published and released in January of last year. It was funded primarily by the Kresge Foundation, who basically recognized that there was a need, given the state that the city of Detroit was at that particular point in time, to reinvent the city of Detroit and to reinvent it along a couple of lines. Some of the specific issues that the strategic framework is really intended to respond to and try to address are a couple of things. First and foremost, high unemployment. Detroit currently has a very high unemployment rate. It is more than twice the statewide average. Concentration of poverty in the city of Detroit also remains very high. It's estimated that probably something on the order of 40% of Detroit households are living at or below the poverty level, and only 50% of Detroiters are gainfully employed. Another issue that the strategic framework was also intended to address is the issue of vacant property in the city of Detroit, which continues to be a huge problem. There are, according to data that we've compiled at Detroit Future City, something on the order of about 150,000 parcels of vacant land in the city of Detroit. Now, to put that in perspective, if you were to group all of those 150,000 parcels together, that basically equates to about 20 square miles of vacant land. To put that in further perspective, that's equivalent to a city the size of New York City, but vacant, right in the middle of the city of Detroit. So that's a huge problem that the strategic framework recognizes can no longer be allowed to stand. And a related issue to that is the problem of poor city service delivery in the city of Detroit. And a lot of that is frankly due to the fact that we have experienced the population loss that we have. The reality is, at its height, back in the 1950s, Detroit was home to probably about 1.8 million people. Now, according to the most recent census back in 2010, Detroit was only a little over 700,000 people. So since then, if population trends have held up, here we are now in 2014, it's estimated that we're probably something on the order of about 680,000 people. So that population decline is significant in terms of impacting city service delivery, because what you've seen is that as people have left, they've taken tax revenue with them. And as the tax revenue has declined, it's made it difficult to have a budget with which to deliver effective city services. So the Detroit Strategic Framework was really drafted with the intention of responding to those specific issues. And the goal is specifically to try to address what we consider to be 5 major strategic priorities that we're going to be working on as an implementation office this year and also into 2015. One is to hire more Detroiters and to do what we can to try to facilitate the hiring of more Detroiters. The other is to create and do things to stabilize neighborhoods. The third thing is to try to improve and renew city services through strategic innovations. The fourth thing is to develop an innovative open space network, recognizing that as we've lost population, the problem of vacant land has become a major issue. But there may be some ways that we can actually make the issue of vacant land an asset rather than a liability. And the fifth thing that we seek to do basically is to enact and fulfill regulatory reform here in the city of Detroit. So part of how we do that and part of how we accomplish our objectives is through strategic partnerships and through pilot projects. So we now have on deck, when we launched and officially opened our implementation office this year in January, we now have over 53 pilot projects that we're going to be implementing. Now, many people ask the question, okay, but you're not a governmental agency, you're not a city department, so how can you really implement anything? How can you fulfill the goals that you talk about? And we do that really for the most part through partnerships. So we've developed a series of partnerships with a number of organizations and entities from throughout Detroit and Southeast Michigan. Our most significant partner actually is the city of Detroit. One of the things that we do have as a significant plus in our column is the fact that Mayor Mike Duggan has actually embraced the Detroit Strategic Framework. So that, along with the fact that there is an implementation office which is charged in implementing this framework, really kind of puts us ahead of the game. Many of you, if you've been working in this area for some time, you know that years have gone and we've seen a lot of master plans and blue ribbon panels who've been convened to come up with a strategy or a set of recommendations or a fix-it plan for what ails the city of Detroit. And I've seen a lot of that during my time in city government. For the most part, I can tell you that generally those plans have usually wound up on a shelf gathering dust. The two things that separate the Detroit Strategic Framework from that is, A, you've got the Kresge Foundation, which has stepped up and gone the additional mile of not only funding the strategic framework, but also funding our implementation office so that we can work to bring some of these recommendations to life. But the other thing is we have a mayor in place now who has said, I like this framework and I want to take a lot of these recommendations and bring them to life, and I want to incorporate them in how I go about the business of governing the city. So our most significant and probably biggest pilot project in terms of its potential impact is that the mayor has actually asked us to work alongside his staff and staff at the city's planning and development department to take the strategic framework and incorporate many of those recommendations into an amended master plan of policies for the city of Detroit. The master plan of policies is a document that not only guides land use decisions and zoning decisions, but when it's done the right way, it can really be used to guide development and funding decisions, not only from the standpoint of how the city does its own capital budgeting, but when it receives grant dollars, be they from the federal government or from the state government, or even from nonprofit or private foundations or corporate sources, to guide exactly where to best use and distribute those dollars in order to get the most bang for the buck. So we're really looking forward to continuing to work with this administration and also to work with a variety of our corporate and nonprofit partners to continue to bring the strategic framework recommendations to life through Detroit Future City. Now, to bring it on home to this particular crowd and make it relevant, I really want to echo a lot of the sentiments that Mary expressed. And I have to say that one of my favorite, in fact, I think it's probably my all-time favorite television show just in terms of quality, is Mad Men. Looking forward to the last season on AMC this year. Of course, we all know Don Draper, main character of the show. One of the things that Don Draper always says is if you don't like what people are saying about you, change the conversation. I think in order to make it relevant for this particular crowd, which are people that are working for agencies or in some cases working for corporations, think of it in terms of this way. Who is your employer or who is your client? And if your client is based in the city of Detroit or based in Southeast Michigan, and if they are successful at doing what they do, is there a way for you to do your job on their behalf and also link what you do to promote their success to the world at large, to a larger narrative about the city of Detroit that begins to change the conversation about the city of Detroit and to change the way we think about the city of Detroit? Just as was mentioned in the case that Levi did with Braddock, and also in the case that Chrysler did with M&M in the city of Detroit. Is there a way to begin to change perceptions about Detroit, how we think about Detroit, and how the world may perceive the city of Detroit? You can affect that narrative, and you can change that narrative, and you can change it for the better. Thanks.
Thank you. We want to make this interactive, so if you have questions, raise your hand. You have them.
Yeah, I have a question for Ken. When it comes to the framework, which sounds very exciting, and I think there's a lot of great elements there, how will you work with the surrounding counties with Detroit to implement that framework?
That's a very interesting question, and actually that's one of the things that some people have actually criticized the Detroit Strategic Framework for, because they've said that it doesn't have a regional focus. Now I'm going to speculate a little bit about exactly why that is, and I say speculate a little bit, even though I do know the answers to some of the questions surrounding why the focus is not regional, but I don't know all of them. Again, I joined the implementation office as executive director back in January. But I do know, based on conversations with the staff that I work with, some of whom had a significant hand in drafting the framework before I got here, I think there was a strategic decision made to not make the plan a regional plan, and I think that really boiled down to a couple of things. One is that when you start talking about taking what ails the city of Detroit and trying to fix it from the standpoint not only of what Detroit can do, but what the region can do, it starts to become a much bigger lift and a much more complicated process in terms of how you create that plan and how you put it together. To kind of give you a sense of some of the history behind it, the strategic framework was several years in the making. It initially started out actually under former Mayor Dave Bing, and the initial planning process was actually launched as far back as early 2010. Now, had a decision been made at that point to say we want to make this a regional plan and create a regional framework, the planning and the discussions would probably still be taking place. So Because at that point, it's not just about the mayor, it's also about getting the buy-in of Bob Picano, Mark Hackle, Brooks Patterson. And I can tell you, being a former council president and former mayor, getting the buy-in of those guys is not always an easy thing. And then when you start to drill down to the local level, then you're talking about getting the participation of local mayors and local city councils and township boards. So I think a decision was made that that would just be too big a lift. I think the other thing also, and I think in retrospect it was probably a good decision, it was about saying, look, we need to come up with a plan that we can implement quickly and that Detroit can do for itself. Now, as we move forward with procuring our wins and getting some of our projects done and making things happen, if other people want to come and buy in and want to support that process, that's great, but this has to be a plan and a framework that we can implement without waiting for somebody else to come and join in.
Other questions? Well, I have one, of course. You guys talked, I think that when Peter was talking, he talked a lot about what we can do internally to get the stories out. How would you guys, each of you, suggest that we do internal communications to actually get those stories out and then have them spread, for lack of a better term, virally?
Actually, it's something I think about a lot. That you know, we're in this world that we're constantly thinking about the macro communication, all these big ways to get the broadcast, whatever the message is. And with social media, it's kind of changed the way we think of communication. But I think that we have unfortunately minimized the power of one-to-one conversation and communication, real social media. And you think about just the people in this room, whether maybe 70 people here, if we all had, let's say, for lack of a better term, basically talking points, that we could go out of this room and we could go today and we could talk to our friends and our colleagues, and we could respond when you hear the very commonly too ubiquitous negative comment about Detroit, and we would actually have good, logical, and emotional responses to kind of fight back with the image that we hear about all the time. I live in West Michigan, and unfortunately I hear a lot of negatives about Detroit. And I guess I'm just too passionate to let it go by. I talk a lot about Detroit, and I tell people why I really love this community and the people who live here. And I think I've changed some minds. And I wonder if some of those people have then gone on and said, well, you know what, I just heard this about Detroit. Look what's happening here, the renaissance that's happening here, the mostly private sector and real people movement that's happening here. Not really depending upon government like many communities would, as much as you might think. The real activity that's happening here is happening in the private sector and individuals. That's the real exciting stuff. So I just think that being a little more proactive and to be prepared with those elevator speeches and some facts and figures as we talk to our community. I think of my 23-year-old son, who's the biggest proponent of Detroit. He lives in Kalamazoo, kind of an entrepreneurial guy. And as a kid, we would come to Tiger games and whatever. And he's an auto geek. So he couldn't get enough of Detroit. Today, he still can. He comes here, the auto show comes here whenever he can with his friends. He's always bringing friends, many of whom, he says, have these negative comments about Detroit. They spend a little time in Freaktown, they do whatever, and they leave with a different impression. So I just think we need to really kind of be ambassadors for the city in a one-to-one way.
Other thoughts on that?
I think from the Quicken Loans and Rock Ventures perspective, we would like to see people in this room and the people who are telling the stories maybe embraced under one umbrella brand. And we're hoping that the opportunity Detroit brand begins to resonate more and more within the Detroit community, and that, when you have power and volume behind a brand, then more people can espouse it and talk to it and promote it, enhance it. So, Opportunity Detroit is very broad in the sense that you can look at Detroit, whether it's downtown, midtown neighborhoods, as being a place where there's opportunity, and the opportunity, is across the spectrum for anybody to make an impact and have an impact and do something great for a great American city. So we would like to see that Opportunity Detroit brand embraced more widely and used as a city brand.
Just to respond to your question, I do think, I agree absolutely with what you said about the value of one-to-one impact, because I do think we sometimes downplay the impact of that in this day and age. However, on the flip side, at the complete opposite extreme, I don't think we can undervalue the importance of social media. Increasingly, it's the way things get out, and if you want to get something to go viral, that's one of the ways to do it. And it's one of the things that we even recognize at Future City. We went through kind of a rebranding process shortly after I came aboard, so we launched our website, which is www.detroitfuturecity.com, and we do also have a presence on Facebook and Twitter. And the reality is, if you're not using social media to get your message out there, you're probably missing the boat in this day and age. And it frankly can be a great way to get something to go viral if that's what your objective is.
I'd just like to hear the panel address this one aspect. The recovery of Detroit is very much a tale of two cities, and it's very easy to talk about the business aspect. And traveling for business, sitting next to somebody on the airplane, people say, well, so what's going on in Detroit? And I tell them the real stuff that's going on, and I tell them the positives. But I bring up the neighborhoods. And, and Mary, you live in Detroit, you know your neighborhood. A lot of us don't know the neighborhoods. A lot of us don't know the stories. There is a perception that, and not deserved in my opinion, that people in Detroit are lazy. That you've got the welfare people, that you've got this going on and that going on. When, there's just a few people that behave that way. A lot of people in Detroit just need a leg up. That's all they need. And then they're ready to run on their own, but sometimes they just need a little bit of help. So how are we going to talk about that message too? How are we going to talk about these people that have been living in difficult circumstances, they want better schools, all of these kinds of things. That's the harder thing. The development's easy. How do we address that part too?
Because we're a business publication, it is more difficult to tell neighborhood stories unless there's business in the neighborhoods. But I give a couple of examples of amazing stories. One is the Brightmoor neighborhood, which is northwest of the intersection of I-96 and the Southfield Freeway. That's a national story, what's happened in Brightmoor. That was a community that was started in the 1920s. They're modest houses, but that's where the blight, what's his name, Bill Pulte? Yeah, well, no, it was Bill Pulte's group. Got the contract to clear the blight from that area. And now, and I've seen some of these things on Model D, I think, and some other places, there's somebody who's raising goats in that neighborhood. There are artists who are buying houses for $500 or $1,000. It's a strong neighborhood that's taking place. Is it what it was 20, 30, 40 years ago? No. We're never going to be what Detroit was. But it can be something interesting and different. And so people are using this as an opportunity to put a stake in the ground and make a difference. And that's a great neighborhood story. Today in today's issue of Crane's Detroit Business on page 3, we have a terrific story about West Village and all of which is when I lived in West Village, I used to say it's the poor side of Indian Village. But it's Indian Village is single family homes, and in West Village there's a mix. And there's a really cool restaurant row going in on Agnes, which is, it's a short block, but there's 2 large apartment buildings in that neighborhood. And Craftworks, which is kind of a hot new restaurant, is there. And we talk about the investment fund, this revolving investment fund that the city of Detroit has that's bankrolling some of these things. And the reason that people like Red Hook Diner from Ferndale is going in there is they like the neighborhood. They like the historic structures. They like the vibe of the neighborhood. And so we are trying to tell neighborhood stories that are sometimes taken for granted, I think, in other communities. But we have to keep lifting up what are the opportunities, to your phrase, opportunity Detroit. A lot of people are seeing a lot of opportunities in this city.
Hey, Mary, to put you on the spot here, a lot of people here know a lot about neighborhoods or have information. Detroit 2.0 is going outside of Detroit, if I remember correctly,
Right.
it's inside. How can they get that information to you?
Well, Amy Hamerl is our Detroit reporter now. Now that she's an interesting story in and of herself. She's from Brooklyn. She came to the University of Michigan for a fellowship, but unlike so many people who just stay in Ann Arbor, she and her husband actually came to Detroit and fell in love with Detroit, bought a house in West Village, and are restoring the house, and she is deeply embedded in the city of Detroit now. We were really lucky to get her because she has worked for CNN and all different kinds of places, but came to U of M for this fellowship. So now she's doing the Detroit 2.0 newsletter, but she's covering the city of Detroit, so she'd be a good place to start. And that's another pitch. I have two handouts up here. One is how to get your news in cranes with all the beat lists and all that stuff, what makes a crane story. And then the other one is a one-page explainer of the homecoming. So you might know people who are expatriates who we should know about in order to put them on the invitation list and send them information about this amazing conference in September.
Other questions? Wait back for a second.
Oh, sorry. Hey,
Alexis, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to I really appreciate your question about the neighborhood and how you really tell those stories. And I think one thing also when we talk about what's happening in the neighborhoods, I think we have to branch out, and it can't just be the super quirky stories about someone with the goat farm, which is a cool story, but there are other people doing real work that people in this city can relate to. Because I do believe that while it's important for us to get out nationally and tell different stories about Detroit, I think I want to see how we can really engage the people who are here. They can start to feel better about the communities they live in and see more opportunities for themselves. So I would love to be able to maybe do something from the city's perspective. If you guys have ideas on how we can better tell that story and really reach out to people in our neighborhoods, I would love suggestions on that. So thank you.
One thing I did want to say just on this issue of neighborhoods in the city of Detroit. So I had a blast yesterday. I was actually asked to serve on another panel at the Free Press Film Festival, and the panel was actually following the premiere of a movie called Lean, Mean, and Green, which has actually been executive produced by John Gallagher, who is a columnist and writer for the Detroit Free Press. And the focus of the documentary, it's a little less than an hour, is it basically takes a look at not only the city of Detroit, but also Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Youngstown, Ohio, and also Torino, Italy, and Ruhr Valley in Germany. All communities, all parts of the country and the world that have experienced similar problems with population loss, industrial disinvestment, and all of the issues that go along with it. But it also talks about how those communities are now reinventing themselves. And Mary, you talked about Brightmoor, which is featured very heavily in that, along with some other areas in the city of Detroit. It's my understanding this documentary is going to be airing on PBS at some point soon. I do want to really encourage everybody to watch it because it really kind of does a great job of showing how the city of Detroit and some communities within Detroit are positioning themselves to do things differently in recognition of the challenges that we face. But it also kind of points to the larger issue, which addresses the question that originally came up, which is that people in Detroit are not lazy. They are organizing. They're forming community groups. They're doing things like planting community gardens, creating their own job employment programs as a way to make things happen. To make that relevant for you, for those of you that are here as representatives of corporations or who work for agencies and you have corporate clients, think in terms of maybe doing partnerships with some of these neighborhood groups, maybe doing things to support their efforts, whether it's funding a community cleanup or dedicating some of the workforce of your clients or of your corporations to go out and volunteer some of these efforts, because that kills two birds with one stone. One is it provides boots on the ground to help with a lot of these efforts in the neighborhoods, but then that's a great story that then you could put out about what your client or about what your business is doing to help things in the city of Detroit.
Pat, do you want to keep going a little bit here since we've got some discussion? Because I did call on Maura, so.
I was just reminded when I was listening to this discussion, when we did the neighborhood version of the Detroit Transformation Media Briefing, and we took a page out of Crane's sort of house party book, and remember, March, how impressed the media, we had them, international, national, local, regional, and we were on Livernois Avenue in Detroit, and they were amazed at the entrepreneurship, the storefronts that were coming back to life, the pride in the neighborhood, but most of all, they loved being welcomed into a couple of homes and listening to people passionately talk about their love of their neighborhood and their part of Detroit, which was not downtown. So I think there's just, you know, our city's laid out beautifully for sort of these stories that if we followed some of our roads out from Campus Martius and told those stories along those lines, it could be really powerful, and it's there. We just have to make those connections.
Makes sense. I can't, I'm gonna take moderator license for just a second, because we have a bunch of PR people in the room. I'm gonna ask, we're big on key messages, right, for PR? There we go. That was your question? Can you guys go down the line, and I'd like 1 or 2 key messages that everyone in this room should use about talking about Detroit. Dave?
Probably that what I always say, because I think it's more genuine and truthful, is that this is a city that literally put America and to some degree the world on wheels and really changed the story of America in so many ways and at so many points over our short lifespan as a country. And that if you think Detroit's done something in the past, just wait, because if you really look at what's happening here today, in this kind of gritty city of people who are used to kind of getting beaten up, they just kind of get back up and make it work, because this city really does work. And to the comment about, you know, perception of laziness, I think that I typically will say that you look at how hard this city has worked to get where it is today, I only can think it's going to move forward in a very positive development in the future. So I would say, you bet, gritty, interesting city with unique, authentic experiences to offer.
Paula?
Again, reiterating from my earlier comments, that there are opportunities here that can help you impact the outcome of a great American city. So, I mean, this is where it is. This is the future. So,
Mary?
I would say opportunity and innovation. This is what the city is learning again, and it was 100 years ago, and it will be again.
And Ken?
Yeah, I would agree. I think, again, getting back to that whole theme of changing the conversation, I think all too often the conversation about Detroit has been characterizing it as a city of desperation. I think increasingly we're going to be known as a city of innovation and inspiration.
Perfect. Thank you so much.